Good evening and welcome to the December 16th, 2010 Planning Board meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. We have one public hearing this evening. The board's action in these matters. Oh, I am sorry. Thank you. First order of business, I'm the acting chairman in case any. And I am acting, believe me. The approval of minutes from the November 18th, 2010 Planning Board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments, changes? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Acting chairman votes aye. Now we get to our public hearings. Thank you. The board's action in this particular matter has been deemed to be quasi-judicial in nature. If any person believes any member of the board has a conflict of interest, that issue should be raised at this point or it will be deemed waived. I'll read it into the record. The application of Northern New England Telephone Operations, LLC, owner and Verizon Wireless applicant for property located at 56 Islington Street, requesting amended site plan approval for the installation of an emergency backup generator with related paving, lighting, utilities, landscaping, drainage, and associated site improvements. Said property is shown on Assessor Map 126, Lot 23, and lies within the Central Business B District and the Historic District. Who is here on behalf of the applicant? And please, when you step up, please state your name clearly for the record.
Mr. Chairman, good evening, members of the board.
I have to recuse myself for this.
Oh, okay, thank you.
My colleague, M.L. Geffert. I'm Tom Hildreth. I'm with the McLean Law Firm representing Verizon Wireless tonight. And with me in the audience is Chip Fredette, who is the real estate site acquisition specialist for the company, and Doug Shadell, who is a sound engineer. And if it would be agreeable to the chair, I've got something I'd like to hand out that each member might have as we go along. And I wanted to ask, too, was anybody on the board today on the board in 1997? No. We were last before you on this very same project.
I may have been. That may have been my first year, but.
Good. How are you?
I asked for two reasons, because in 1997, that's when we came before you for approval of a site plan that included adding an array of antennas on that existing rooftop tower, putting an equipment shelter at the back of what was then Verizon Central Office, now Fairpoint, and including the installation of an external backup power generator. So this was approved in 1997, and we installed all of the improvements with the exception of the generator, which we're getting to now. And when staff reviewed this, they determined that enough time had passed, and we hadn't been continually in the process of making the improvements, so we're refreshing them now. The other reason I ask is that when I went to look at my notes from 1997, we reported to you then that there were 36 million subscribers of wireless services in America at that time. When I looked last week, there were 298 million. So just to give you a sense for the trajectory of the ubiquity of the technology since then. So this is, I think, a very small level, low-key thing. We've been to the Technical Advisory Committee, who made recommendations, two of which are largely now complied with. We got HDC re-approval last week. A couple of differences this time around than last time. There is a chain link fence that will be bumped out and will surround and embrace the generator, and the chain link fence will have vinyl slatting within the links, and will also have inside it a sound absorbent and sound deflecting material. And if you read the I don't expect you to read it all right now, the Modeling Specialties report, it takes you through just a pretty brief analysis of its predicted calculation of the noise level at the closest property boundary to the east is going to be below the limits of daytime operation that the city has set. But the staff had also recommended, or the TAC had also recommended, that we do an actual field test when we are installed, which we are perfectly happy to do. And we predict that the test will match the predictions. But Doug Shadell has with him, if anyone's interested in seeing, a sample of this sound-absorbing blanket material. It's not going to be visible because of the green vinyl slatting on the outside of the fence, but this will be hung inside of the fence to deflect and absorb sound. And just so that you know and have an appreciation for why we're doing this, right? This site, our site, the wireless antennas at this site are powered by the standard household current that runs by on the street. That's our primary power source. Inside the equipment shelter are racks of backup batteries that will give us about 8 hours of life when the primary power is lost. The generator is intended to come in after the batteries are exhausted, and if we have a fully fueled generator, we'll get about 72 hours worth of continued operation. So it'll only operate in an emergent circumstance, except that for 1/2 hour each week, we will have a pre-programmed time when it will run for maintenance, testing, kind of routine upkeep purposes. That time slot, we can select. It'll be between the daytime hours of the city's limits. And we have no particular agenda on what time that would be between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Probably like noontime on a Wednesday or something that will be the least conspicuous. That's the purpose of it. That's how it will operate. I've described a little bit about how we intend to shield it from view and also control the sound. I invite any questions if anyone has any.
Any questions for the board?
I know you looked at both diesel and natural gas, and is it my understanding there's a preference to use diesel versus natural gas because you want to make sure this operates in emergency conditions and it's more reliable, or what's the background on that?
That's part of the rationale, yes. Our standard deployment is a diesel generator. Oftentimes when we're using gas, we don't have it available through pipes in the street, like I think we do here. And usually that means an additional apparatus. We have to put a tank on another 4x8 concrete pad, and there's a clear zone requirement around the tanks and so forth. And so because of that factor, I think as much as any other, we tend to lead with diesel, just because that's the majority of what's deployed in our field. But they also are slightly more reliable. At this site here, we didn't do a complete analysis of the piping underground, but it would be much more invasive installation for us to have to dig up the piping and connect a gas pipe to this generator. So we elected to go with the diesel.
And just to follow up, the diesel fumes from this, what would they be comparable to in terms of, a 10-wheel truck out there idling for half an hour, or can you give us any sense of that, just because of the closeness of the residences?
Yeah, I don't have anything scientific to tell you about that. I can tell you that the size of the generator, it's a 60-kilowatt generator, is a standard kind of home-sized backup power generator. So if any of you have diesel-powered generators at home, it's going to operate in very much the same way. I do know that we have some kind of point source limitations under state environmental regulations that we are way below. I mean, that we're not even close to needing to permit this as a point source of pollution, but I can't tell you anything more than that.
Sure. And then in the world of noise attenuation, what you handed out tonight looks like slightly different decibel levels than what was in the materials you submitted. If you can just kind of review for us.
Sure. I think that in Doug's report, and Doug is here if there are questions that go beyond my ken or if you want to hear from him directly, on the final page 4, he's got a table that shows the closest two most sensitive property line receptors, the east and the west, right from the location. 26 feet from the east property line, 75 feet from the west property line. And with the three levels of sound control devices we are employing. One is that the manufacturer of the generator is supplying some housing and some control devices within what we're purchasing from Generac. They call it their sound mitigation package. We've got the security fence that's got the solid slats to create an additional barrier, and most importantly is this blanket of material that Doug can hold up and show us, kind of a pleated quilt with some special material inside it that will absorb and deflect sound. And as Doug's chart shows, that with all of those in place, we will operate at 56 dB at the eastern property line, where 60 is the daytime limit that's shown on the far right column, and at the west property line it's 53 dB compared to the 60 standard. So I think when we submitted what we submitted, it was before we had engaged Doug, and we didn't add that final layer of sound control material.
And is the modeling, and maybe this is a question for him, I'm not sure, is that modeling directly applicable to this site where you have, hard walls that go up quite a ways in terms of carrying sound up, or is this kind of a generic?
Let Doug come and address that for us.
Mr. Chairman, Board.
Could you state your name for the record,
My
please?
name is Doug Shadell. I'm with Modeling Specialties in Westford, Massachusetts.
Thank you.
The question related to the numerical modeling, because we're 30 feet or so from the hard surface, it about doubles the distance from the very nearby property line. 26 feet from the generator is the property line. And if you've been in the back parking lot, it's extremely close. And the other one is 75 feet. The wall will, in fact, reflect sound, but because of the large, flat surface, the sound that's reflected from the wall will primarily go toward State Street, not toward the property line. And the model does account for that, but it doesn't include much of that effect because of the geometry. And I would say that the generator itself, you probably saw a number like 62 or 63 before.
Yeah, up to 66.2 at position 1, but I'm not sure that was the radiator end, which I think is the end closest to the building.
I was not involved in the first numbers, but I would say that the generator that was specified is an extremely well mitigated generator where the exhaust and the radiator air, the two primary sources of the generator noise, is blown out the bottom of the generator and then through a cowling which is lined with absorptive material. And this very substantial generator produces 62 decibels at 72 feet. That's the manufacturer's specifications. It's 62 in the directions of the property lines. And because the Portsmouth criteria are 60 decibels at the property line, therefore we had to consider other options that would further reduce that sound. That's what the fence and the absorbing material is about.
And the materials on the sides, is there any, you probably can't have it over the roof for exhaust reasons.
The fence will be a security enclosure, and it extends from the existing fence line. It pops out around a generator, and as Mr. Hildreth already pointed out, the generator is a diesel generator, and so instead of being low to the ground, it's on top of the fuel tank, so it's taller. The top of the generator is about 10 feet, 11 feet maybe, but it's relatively tall compared to what you would expect. The engine in that generator is about the size of a diesel pickup truck, 5.7 liters. And as it operates, most of the sound from the unit will be coming through that cowling and out the top. So we have added 2 feet higher barrier than the top of the generator, assuming that all of the sound is coming out of the top And if we do the calculation over the barrier to the nearest property line at 25 feet, 26 feet, it produces 58 decibels, I believe.
56?
Less than, yeah, it will be 60 decibels with a little margin.
Great, thank you, that was very helpful.
Could I follow up? Just to follow up on that, looking at the table and looking at the plan, the generator is 4 feet from the equipment shed, and the equipment shed is between the generator and the west property line. So, I guess could you? I guess I don't understand the physics of this. How it seems to be a relative. I know it's exponential, but there seems to be a fairly small difference between the DBA at the east property line, which is 26 feet away with no obstruction in the way, and the west property line, which is 3 times the distance away with a building in the way. So could you just explain how that happens?
Of course.
For the layman.
Sound decreases with increased distance. Right. It drops about 6 decibels for every doubling of distance.
Right.
And as you correctly point out, about 75 feet, our criteria are at 23 feet, so 75 feet is about 2 doublings of distance. That arithmetic is pretty straightforward. But if I'm speaking to you and I put this barrier between me and the microphone, I disappear. Inside this blanket is a barium-loaded vinyl material that is a substantial shield, and it absorbs the sound impacting the barrier, and it's 2 feet above the generator. So the sound that is going to the nearest neighbor at 25 feet is blocked directly, and some of the sound that is going vertically will get reconnected and sent to the property line, but much less of it. So that part that is gone amounts to the additional distance to the other property line.
Actually, maybe I was confused. I understand the short side, the short property line distance. It's the long property line distance with the building in the way. I was.
Oh, it isn't in the way, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay.
With the generator on top of the oil tank.
Yeah, it's above the building?
It's at the top of the building,
okay.
Or essentially at the top of the building. So the existing shelter will not perform any significant barrier to the sound.
Further questions, board? I have just a small question. For the sake of discussion, let's say that the estimates are low, and it turns out that, in fact, it's 62 decibels instead of 56, and it turns out to be 60 instead of 53 as your estimates. What do you do to mitigate the sound, to get it down to a level that is more acceptable?
If, in fact, both Generac and Modeling Specialties, or one or the other, has underestimated this sound, there would be, for the nearest property line, the fence can be elevated another foot, or calculated, therefore, based on what is measured after the fact. If it's a number that is too high, then the fence will just have to be raised. That's the logical, most straightforward solution. And as Mr. Tainter pointed out, since the shelter is almost an obstacle on the other side, a short extension on the top of the shelter would perform the same function in the longer side. So either way, it's a very minor fix to get additional, because the substructure, the strong fence that goes 10.5 feet tall, is already in place. It would just be a matter. I don't expect that to happen, but if it were to happen, the solution would be relatively straightforward because the infrastructure is already in place.
Just a curiosity question more than anything else. Further questions from the board? Okay, thank you. Oh, we have a...
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to...
again, for the record...
Yes, Tom Hildreth for Verizon Wireless. I just wanted to register a I guess what I'd call a reservation of rights. We're going to happily abide by the Technical Advisory Committee's suggestion of conducting an actual field measured test from live operation. But I want to just, for the record, reserve my right at some point to challenge the application of the noise ordinance to this device on the basis that, number one, it's an emergency generator, and those are exempt from the noise limitations. And number two, and I've had 2 rounds of discussion with staff about this, and I just think it's kind of interesting and just want to lay it out there for you. Emergency generators are exempt from the noise ordinance, which is why Doug's report only addresses the scheduled weekly operation, not the actual times when it's operating as an emergency generator. Although the ordinance doesn't make that distinction. It just says the emergency generator without regard to when it's operating. But if we accepted that level of restriction, there's also a list of exemptions from the noise ordinance, which includes maintenance activities that are conducted between 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. And as Chip and I were talking about this over dinner, we wondered if we had a field technician who came out to the site every week with pliers and wrenches and fired up the generator and tinkered around with it in doing the maintenance that the automatic testing does, if that would more clearly be agreed upon, that's maintenance, and that's an activity that would be exempted from the noise ordinance. We happen to conduct that maintenance on an automatic pre-programmed basis. So I'm not quarreling with the condition that the TAC has suggested, and I'm confident, having worked with Doug in the past, that we're going to pass that test with flying colors, but I'd be remiss if I didn't at least state for the record a different way to look at that.
I do not have the regulations in front of me, nor am I an attorney. So if I may make a suggestion, if you have concerns, you may write a letter to the city attorney and seek his opinion, and maybe that's something that you could do to avoid any misunderstandings.
No, I get the sense from talking with Rick, too, that it's something that the staff may be percolating up already as a revision to the ordinance at some point.
Okay, well, the record will be noted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wouldn't say that we're revising the ordinance. I think what I said was that we have lots of issues with generators and that we have taken the position that regular exercising does not fall under any of the exemptions there. And so that, for the record, is our response.
Good. Any further questions from the board? Okay, any further comments or presentation?
No,
okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to be heard to, for, or against the project? Okay. Any second time? Any third time? Obviously, there were no first time. If not, I'll close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve of the 2 stipulations that the sound tests be carried out after installation with city staff on site, and that testing shall be coordinated if there are multiple external generators on site.
I'll second that motion.
Before we do that, we have the waivers that we need to act on.
Oopsie.
Oh, yes, those waivers should probably be done before.
Yes, before the vote, yes.
All right, procedurally, I guess we'll just stop right there for a moment. In your packet, you will note some waivers that were requested, and the waivers do require a 2/3 vote of the board.
I'll make a motion to grant all of the waivers listed in the attachments.
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Chairman votes aye. Okay, now back to the application itself. We have a motion, and I believe we had a second. Is there any discussion? Cindy?
I just like the record to show that while I understand they want to reserve that right to challenge the noise ordinance, the fact that we have an application before us seeking approval of their generator for testing, I just wanted the record to show that I don't agree. They've got an application before us. We're either going to vote for it or not for it. I think if we didn't feel the noise ordinance applied, we wouldn't be voting tonight. everybody has the right to challenge anything, any laws at any time, but as far as this particular application is concerned, I would just like to see if there's consensus on the board that this does in fact apply, that this is not maintenance, but this is testing of an emergency generator. And while it's operating during emergency, no, the noise ordinance doesn't apply, but it's weekly testing. My feeling is it falls under the noise ordinance, and that's why we're here at all tonight.
So if I may summarize, you're saying that the weekly, it's not maintenance, it's testing, essentially.
That is my feeling.
Okay, are you seeking a consensus of the board?
I'm curious as to what others might
Well,
think.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
Liam?
I guess I agree.
Yes,
talking
is
to-
a definite maybe?
Well, these, the testing is going to be for a brief period of time, correct? Or not?
Half hour, once a week,
Half hour.
as I understand it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't find that, personally, I don't find that an unreasonable amount of time if the noise level were to exceed slightly city limits, personally. But that's just me.
I agree. I just would comment that I don't consider it maintenance whatsoever. Testing, yes, and then in the trade, we often call it exercising. I mean, the real purpose is that it turns on, stays running, and I don't know whether they'll do a transfer, whether it actually undergoes an electrical transfer it does. So they're transferring, coming off the grid and going on, physically going on generator power while this exercising is taking place, and then retransferring back to the grid power, and then the generator continues to run for a short amount of time, and then there's a cool down when it shuts off and cools down. So it's certainly not maintenance. It's because there's nothing to. They're not maintain. It's exercising.
And I would add my points of view. I drive a diesel car. I change the oil every 3,000 miles. That's maintenance. I don't go out once a week and start it up to see if it still runs. So I would agree with Cindy's observation and the rest of the board.
And I don't know whether the planning director has anything to add on that.
The only thing that I would add is that this has come to the fore because we're having so many applications for these. And one generator on State Street is not going to be a problem. But if every property up and down State Street decides to install a generator and they're all testing for half an hour a week and all in different cycles, we're going to have a real issue. So we can't kind of ignore that aspect. The reason that the ordinance was written the way it was when it was written was there really weren't any of these things. They were all the little portable generators that people rolled out of their garages in an ice storm and plugged into their house and fired up their furnace, and didn't have to be exercised once a week. And we're getting a lot since the last ice storm, since a year and a half ago, whenever it was. We've had tons of applications, and we're seeing them all over the place in very tight, dense situations. And we've had a lot of issues, both residential and commercial. So that is why I think we're concerned about managing that in the city. In a couple of years, we're going to have rumblings all over the city at different times of the day.
Can I just ask a question? I appreciate Attorney Hilges's point that his client is going to try to do the testing at a time and when it'll be least bothersome, if that's the right way of saying it. Does the city have any control within that window of time from 7 to 9 or whatever it is to state when that will be more specifically or not?
I don't know.
Not to my knowledge under current ordinances, to specify it can only be 1 to 3 on a Wednesday, not to my knowledge.
No, but we do, when the permits are issued for these, and they are now, there's a standard note that goes on every permit that gives that window of testing allowed.
Okay.
Which is
Weekdays,
7 a.m.
7 a.m. to
9 p.m.
9 p.m., but I think we're doing 6
Oh,
p.m.
no, because we're using the other ordinance, which is, I think,
Right.
is to 6 p.m.
Right, 6 p.m. And shall not exceed 60 dB at the property line.
Okay.
Yeah. And the jury's still out. We haven't had any complaints that I'm aware of yet, and there have been a lot of units that have gone in, and it will be interesting what may or may not happen after the first major outage, when these numbers and times aren't relevant, or aren't in effect, I should say. They're relevant, and see what happens, because
Could be loud.
could be, depending on where you are, what neighborhood you're in, how many there are, it'll be interesting.
Interesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Chairman votes aye. And that will do it. Thank you very much. And that closes our public hearings for the evening. We have one city council referral on the agenda. Now, where is my agenda? There it is.
Right. It's a tree.
Under City Council referrals and requests, the board's action in these matters has been deemed to be legislative in nature. If any person believes any member of the board has a conflict of interest, that issue should be raised at this point, or it will be deemed waived. I'll read it into the record. Request from Parade Office LLC for footing easements, cornice easement, and amended private street easement for property located at 99 Hanover Street. Who is here on behalf of the applicant? If you would, please state your name and affiliation for the record.
My name is Tim Levine, and I'm here on behalf of Parade Office LLC. We are here to request this action by the board for some easements which are essentially administrative in nature. Therefore, some footing encroachments into the public property along Hanover Street, both for the footing and for the roof, which very slightly goes into the public property air rights, and then for some minor modifications which were made to Portwalk Place, which is a private street adjacent to the new hotel.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to hear from the planning director, please.
Yes, we've worked with the applicant and reviewed these and have negotiated to get the details absolutely clear on this. The easement and the cornice easements and the footing easements, as stated, are very minor easements, very small easements, where the building, which meets the zoning requirements of the zoning ordinance, which allows buildings to be built up to the property line. In order to do that, because of the way the building is designed and the way it has been approved by the Historic District Commission, the cornices will extend a few inches out over the public way in one location, and the footings will extend in two areas, or three areas actually, but I think they're covered by two separate easements under the sidewalk. And then the third item, the private street agreement, some changes that were approved through the planning board process, the site plan process over the past year or so, with adjustments to the sidewalks in front of the Residence Inn, and also the approval of the layout of the municipal parking lot. Those resulted in changes to the layout of the street that do not exactly reflect what was previously approved in the private street easement agreement. And again, that's minor, and it reflects approvals that have been made by all of the relevant boards so far. So the staff recommends that the board vote to recommend approval. Now, I'd just like to ask the Deputy City Manager, looking at the motions, what happened at the City Council was that rather than just referring it to the City Council, to the Planning Board, and having us make a recommendation back, the City Council actually took a vote and authorized the City Manager to act on the Planning Board's recommendation. Do you think that the way that the motions are worded here is close enough to carry out that, or do you think it's to recommend that the City Manager approve?
Let's tinker with that a little bit. Let's see.
Before we do, ML, I apologize, did you step down?
If anybody has an objection to who's here to speak, and I didn't want to interrupt.
Okay, no, I'm sorry, I didn't even look around, I apologize. If Jane could reflect that in the record, please? Thank you.
Why don't we broaden it and just say vote to recommend that the city approve? Because,
Okay, so delete the word council in both of those motions.
right, because the city
Yep.
is broad enough to cover both, I think.
Thank you.
Any questions from the board? Any further questions? Okay, we'll, do we have a motion? What's your pleasure?
I'll make a motion to recommend that the city approve the requested footing easement and cornice easement as shown on the footing encroachment plan, sheet 1 of 2, and cornice encroachment plan, sheet 2 of 2, dated November 18th, 2010. And that we vote to recommend that the city approve the revised configuration of the private street easement, access easements, and sidewalk easements in Portwalk Place as shown in the easement and license plan, sheet C3A, dated November 12th, 2010.
Second.
Discussion? Could you repeat that motion, Jane? Just kidding. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Thank you.
Thank you. Happy holidays to all.
Thank you, you too.
You as well.
Well, now we have new business. We have a request from Catherine Whalen for property located at 660 Middle Street for an amendment to the subdivision approval granted on June 17th, 2010, which was stipulation number 2. I believe we have a letter from Attorney Peelich that deals with this.
Want to take over?
I think it would be
Okay.
delightful.
This is something that has come up recently. Attorney Peelich brought it to our attention. The board has had a practice of requiring the deeds associated with an approved subdivision plan be recorded at the same time as the subdivision plat. And the reason for that was to ensure that the city's records are accurate and that any potential purchasers of any lot shown on the plan have full information about the lot's configuration. And that's very important in a lot line relocation plan because you're not creating any new lots, but you're moving around the boundaries between lots. And so things might get neglected to be filed, and then somebody would buy something not knowing what they're actually buying. But this requirement is really not important as we further discussed it in the case of a true subdivision in which you're creating new lots, because it's, somebody's going to look at the subdivision plan to see actually what the layout of the lots are, the new lots are. And in many cases, somebody gets the subdivision plan approved and lots may not be sold for many years thereafter, so this would postpone indefinitely the recording of the plan. So we've looked at this and we've determined that stipulation that we've had is really not necessary for true subdivisions, but we should retain it for lot line relocations. And so we're recommending that you vote to amend that subdivision approval by deleting the stipulation that required the concurrent recording of deeds and plat.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Any questions? Do we need a motion or just a vote? Okay, do we have a motion, ML?
I move to amend the approval to remove the stipulation and just ask that the planning department also just remind us next time so we're remembering.
Thank you.
Second that.
Second. All those in favor? Oh, excuse me, discussion? Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Chairman votes aye. Thank you. And the last item on our agenda is the Planning Director's Report, the Downtown Parking Strategies Update.
Well, as the acting chair well knows, there was
How well?
there was a downtown parking focus group that presented a report earlier this year, and that report has been making its way through the city, has been discussed by many boards and departments and discussed with the city council in general terms. And the recommended approach now is to pull together an omnibus report that would present recommendations for all of the items that are contained in that report and any other related items as well. And that's going to involve the coordination of a number of boards, the Planning Board, the Economic Development Commission, the parking committee, probably traffic and safety also. And so what we've come up with is a general approach, which is that we would put together a staff report in mid-January that would be sent to Planning Board, Parking Committee, and Economic Development Commission, and then schedule a work session for the board's meeting in January, or prior to the board's meeting in January, to talk about that report. And that report would talk about things that are under the Planning Board's jurisdiction, zoning issues relating to changing the off-street parking requirements in the downtown, and also changing the optional payment in lieu of providing off-street parking spaces. But there are also things that are not Planning Board really related as much. For example, constructing a new parking structure at the Worth lot, creating a parking enterprise fund, looking at free or low-cost parking for downtown residents, employees, variable parking rates, and so forth. And so the purpose of this work session would be to have all of the three principal agencies, boards involved in this to look at the report, and then have the Planning Board then to present the staff report to the City Council. Then the City Council would then perhaps refer that to the Planning Board for actually specific zoning changes. And so this would be going into the spring and perhaps the early summer, but late spring probably, kind of pulling this all together in one major change to downtown parking policies, which could include authorizing the bonding for the parking garage and so forth. So that's what we're doing. So we want to just kind of alert you that we're moving in this direction. You should expect to see a report from us in just about a month, and that at the January meeting we'll be talking about this and holding that work session with the other two boards so that we can talk about it as a large group and move it on to the City Council.
I want to just raise, when we had the meeting with the Zoning Board of Adjustment, Robin
Russo.
Thank you, was raising a concern that we were not sufficiently solicitous of business interests when we made significant changes to law ordinances that affected them. And I want to make sure that somehow or other we encourage the business community to participate in this. I know we already have, but I just want, for the record, to make sure that we're taking action so that we can say to Robin, we've done it.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Good. Further questions, thoughts, ideas?
Good. There's no action that needs to be taken on that, just a report. I'd like to just alert you to a couple of other things that, just as part of this report. One is that we're also looking at potentially bringing another zoning amendment to you in January, which relates to the Gateway zoning district. We have, as you know, we have a project which has already been before you in terms of a zoning change and is before the Technical Advisory Committee right now, the Service Credit Union building on Lafayette Road. And one of the features of the Gateway Plan development is a requirement that they meet specific sustainability standards, which is the ability to certify compliance with, or ability to be certified as a lead for neighborhood development project. What we've found is that not all areas of the Gateway actually are amenable to that particular certification, although other LEED and other smart growth certification mechanisms are available that would be appropriate. So we're looking at providing a little bit more flexibility to have different ways to achieve a sustainability standard. And we're probably presenting that to you in January, so just so you're aware of that, that's moving along. So as we're reviewing that in TAC, we'll also be looking at a potential zoning change.
I have a question.
Sure.
Could you clarify the use of the term amenable to sustainable standards?
Well, there are certain things, it's not to sustainable standards, but to that particular sustainable standard. There are aspects of that standard that require more density than we have in some areas of the city. So, and in particular, more streets, more interconnected streets. So it's hard for a single project to create that environment.
So are there specific businesses that are...
It's not the business so much as...
Or specific entities that are not amenable to these changes?
No, it's really more maybe amenable is the wrong word. It's really the site. the area in which we're locating this, on the outskirts of town. The closer to town, the better it works. The further away you get from the center of town, the less well it works. And so we want to look at other options, and we'll be presenting those to you for your feedback.
Okay, good, thank you. Anything further from the planning director?
There was one thing, because I have a number 3 here, but it's blank beside it. So obviously it wasn't too
Wild card.
important.
Happy
Pick a
holidays.
subject. How about the tax cuts?
Is that the Merry Christmas from the planning
Oh, yes,
director?
that's it, right. Happy holidays.
Rick, it might be your development memo, maybe, that was in the packet?
Oh, that could be. I had forgotten, that was so long ago, I forgot about it, yes.
It was only the 6th of December.
A lot happens in 10 days. Yes, we were asked by the city council to provide an update of what is going on in the city in terms of development. We gave them a similar report in August, I think, and so we're going to try to be a little bit more regular on this. So this is just an indication of all the things you might be seeing going on, and as a result of your work so far, and projects that are going to be coming toward you. And there are several projects that we are going to be moving to the next step this week or next week, which we'll see construction start in January. So there'll be more projects coming out of the ground very quickly.
Curiosity question, and I'll address this to Councilor Spear. Why is this information important to the city council?
Well, 2 reasons I can think of. Number one, constituents ask us questions, and we're supposed to know the answers. Oftentimes we don't, so this helps us say, why is that hotel? I thought that, whatever, it's in here.
Yeah, good.
And secondly, when we're trying to develop budgets, this type of new development can influence our thinking in terms of how much higher the city revenues might be with new development. So it's a yardstick, one of many.
Okay, well stated, thank you.
That concludes my report.
Thank you. That means we're done.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Out of here. Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
About Robin.